Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webcast entitled SharePoint Online Adoption Made Easy for MSPs. If you are a Microsoft solution provider or an MSP, you are in the right place. My name is David Husanica. I will be one of your hosts today, president of ServicePoint365. Joining me is John Hodges, who's vice president of product strategy from AvePoint. And between the two of us, our goal is to expose for you some solutions that are available through Tech Data to help you show value for SharePoint Online for your customers. Let me, a little housekeeping as we get started. Wanted just to make you aware that we are recording this event. And so if you are opposed to having this recorded, please drop off now. But we will also be sending the recording link out to everybody, so you should expect that as a follow-up from today's session. You are muted right now, so we do have all the microphones muted just to preserve the background noise. But we do invite you to ask questions, so there is a chat box that you can submit your questions as we're moving through today's discussion. And we will pause periodically and take some of those questions, and then also at the very end. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started, and let's talk about SharePoint Online and what we've built here collectively between ServicePoint and AvePoint and Tech Data. If you are doing Office 365 work, you're aware that the product is really a bundle of products, from the Office desktop apps to Exchange, Skype for Business, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and many, many others. But the real big hitters are the ones listed here. And the challenge that we're going to help you solve today is that bottom right quadrant. When you look at the numbers from Microsoft as far as adoption of SharePoint Online, unfortunately that number is very low. And there's some reasons why that is. And the good news about SharePoint Online is it can do a lot of things. I mean, it really is a very diverse and comprehensive platform. So that's the good news. The bad news about SharePoint Online is in order to get it to do those things, many times you need to know something about SharePoint Online. And the challenge in many of the reseller community as well as the end customers is they just don't have the SharePoint skills on their teams to be able to really go light up SharePoint Online the way that it can benefit the business. So what happens, it ends up either being just a file cabinet online, dumping ground, people just dump stuff in it, or it goes completely unused, and people are opting for other platforms to be able to do file sharing and file collaborations. And so what we want to do is show you a strategy today that really is going to take that red quadrant and turn it into green, hopefully for you and your customers, and do it in a fashion to where it's going to really require minimal SharePoint skills. So how we go about doing that, I like to use this analogy as a way of illustrating kind of what our discussion is going to be today. And I like to use this house analogy for what it really takes to be successful with SharePoint for you and also your customers. And there's a couple really critical components. The first piece is you need to have a structure for the SharePoint environment. It can't just be a blank page and all of a sudden people just dump their files in it. I mean, that's really going to end up being a dead-end street, and people are not going to be happy with that. So what you really need is you need to have some type of structure. And traditionally that meant that either the reseller or the customer had to bring in SharePoint architect level folks to really sit down, analyze the business, whiteboard things out, figure out what that structure needs to be, build the structure, test it, and then implement it. And those can be very costly and time-consuming and require a lot of skill. And so what we have brought to the table here is you can think about ServicePoint 365, which is a product that we're going to expose to you, is really being that structure. So it's the house. It's a house that's already pre-built, meaning that it has rooms already ready to go. It has hallways, it has entrances, the way that you move around the house. And so you can think of, again, the house analogy of, do you go out and you try to build a house from scratch, or do you move into a house that's already built? And so that's really a great analogy for today. When you think about ServicePoint 365, one of the products that we're going to show you is it's a pre-built house. Now, if you are going to move in, if you're going to have a house, once you buy it, then you're going to be faced with, how do you move all your furniture into the house? And so this is where we're going to get into some of the discussion that John will take you in a few minutes, is using the AvePoint tools to be able to help you migrate, or in this case, move your furniture into the house, or in SharePoint case, move your documents into the SharePoint Online environment. And then, of course, if you have all your stuff in their house, you want to keep the doors locked, and you want to make sure you've got an alarm system. And so you want to protect all of your content. And once again, the AvePoint solutions really do a great job of being that ongoing protection of the content, being able to do granular backups and restore, as well as management of this stuff. So keep this picture in mind. We'll come back to it in a minute. But this hopefully will illustrate, the discussions that we're getting ready to go a little bit deeper in. So let's start with the structure, or the house. And so the product that we created is a product called ServicePoint 365. And what we've done to really change the out-of-the-box experience of SharePoint Online is added a number of things to it, ready to go out of the box. And the first thing that we've added is an intuitive navigation, meaning that there's a menuing system already built in. It's linkages between content or content areas already. All of that's already been designed. It works on different form factors. So whether you're on your desktop machine, or if you're on a tablet, even down to a phone, it's a dynamic user interface, meaning that it will resize or refactor itself for the different form factors. So you can use it across the different devices. The other thing that we've done to enhance the SharePoint experience is that we've pre-configured content areas. So if you have any knowledge of SharePoint, you're probably familiar with concepts such as content types and metadata. Well, we deliver a whole host of content types pre-made, out of the box, ready to go, and that includes all kinds of columns and metadata that you can just start using, versus you having to go build out all those areas. So we have content types unique to each of the areas that we're going to explore. Another area that we've really addressed is helping you get there quickly. So the installation, you can actually have a functioning, usable environment in 15 minutes or less. And that environment is then ready for the client's content or further configuration. But the fact that you can actually spin up an environment and have it ready to go in very quickly gives you way ahead of the curve as far as getting down the path of getting an environment for your customers. And then critical, I think, is making sure that you do this with minimal SharePoint skills. And whether or not on your team, and if you have SharePoint people, that's great. You can use them as needed, but it doesn't require SharePoint skilled people in order to be able to implement the core of this system. So let's take a little deeper look at ServicePoint 365 and the functionality that comes out of the box, ready to go. So we've tried to think through the different functional areas of businesses, and determine, that these areas are key ones that most companies would want to be able to either store documents about it, or be able to collaborate internally or externally. And so these content areas are organized, and we call them centers. So we have 11 different centers that come out of the box, ready to go. A single SKU, which we'll talk about more, that you order through your distributor, contains all the centers. And so the different areas, real quick, that we've addressed is we have an area which is really already ready to go for more company intranet. That would be the company center. So this is where each department, accounting, finance, HR, more internal departments can have their own unique areas, their own unique workspaces to be able to share and collaborate, common company calendars, things like that. We have an area set up to manage the client's information. So this can be, information about the customer or the client, and then or a prospective client. And each of them can have what's called a workspace, which is where the documents specific to that client are stored and collaborated on, and then shared if desired. We have an area set up if it's a project-based business. Think about your own companies. Most of you on this call are project services-based companies, so an area to be able to manage all of your project information about the projects, as well as all the documents, deliverables, calendars, tasks, and so forth related to individual projects. Dropping down to the second line, we have an area set up for managing sales opportunities. So this is where you can create a new opportunity that you're chasing. You can have a unique workspace for each opportunity, which is where all the documents and estimates and bids and RFP responses would be stored, and be able to collaborate on your team. And then the ability to turn that sales opportunity into a project automatically. We've automated that process. So between Client Center and Sales Center, many of the customers are using this for what I'd say a simple CRM package, to where maybe Dynamic CRM is too much, or Salesforce is too much for them. They don't really need all that functionality. You can use this application to be the ability to manage client information and also opportunities, and track them, and pipelines, and all of that. A couple other areas, we also give you an area to where you can manage information about your resources and staffing needs, and that's in the Staffing Center and Resource Center. Dropping down to the third row, there's centers already set up for managing different methodologies or processes. That would be Delivery Center, and all the template documents that go along with that, as well as different solutions that may have documentation that you want to be able to manage centrally and make sure everybody knows where to get to it, as well as the Knowledge Center, which is really meant to be more kind of general knowledge repository, which can span anywhere from training materials to safety to whatever. And then finally, the ability to manage information about partner relationships and create workspaces for each partner, and be able to collaborate with them, and provide a secure area that you can share documents with contractors or subs, and provide the ability to upload, download from there. And then finally, an issue management area. So once again, all 11 of these centers come out of the box ready to go. And so we've been somewhat prescriptive in saying, here's how the naming of them and what they're intended for out of the box. But we've also made it very easy that if you want to turn on and off centers, so maybe not all the centers would apply to a particular customer, or rename or repurpose centers. And the way that we've done that, moving to the next screen here, is this is an example where you don't need SharePoint skills to be able to do stuff like that. This settings screen you're looking at shows all the different centers down the left side of the screen, and it also shows you that you can turn on and off different centers. So maybe there's only 3 or 4 of them that are needed right up front. You can turn those on and turn the others off. You can also rename or repurpose centers. So rather than calling it Sales Center, I could go in and just type over the display name, and maybe I call it Proposals or something else. So this flexibility allows you to determine what's the right scope to start with customers, and then the ability to turn on more functionality as the use of the SharePoint environment continues to grow. And it also gives us the flexibility to work in a variety of industries. Since you can easily rename or repurpose things, you can address what some of the unique terminologies that different industries have going on in their businesses. So let's take a quick peek at what an example of a center looks like. And again, since most of the people on this call are doing projects and services, let's take a quick look at maybe Project Center as what an example of what a center would look like. So if I click on the Project Center tab, what I'll be brought into is a screen which shows I'm now within Project Center, and you can see, your navigation is now down the left, so you can easily navigate and jump around between centers at any point in time. But what it's showing me is within Project Center, here's all the different projects that we have going on. And if you look in the center of the screen, you can see it's showing me information about the projects, beginning with like, who's a client and what's the name of the project. If we have service lines or we have different types of projects, information about that, who's the project manager. And so this is examples of some of the metadata that ship with the app. This is just meant to be an example because there's a whole bunch of other fields that are already pre-baked that you could include in these views, either in addition to this or instead of this. So the ability to tailor, what's the most important information if I'm searching for projects, to be able to easily get from the default views. So you can turn on and off fields. You can also add your own fields. So if you have unique fields, like in this area, something related to projects that is real important to the customer, you can easily add those fields and include them in any of these views. So this gives me the ability to then sort, sequence, filter, do quick reporting off of what projects are going on where, and be able to do that level of reporting. If I was over in the Sales Center, I would see a similar view, but it would be of my sales opportunities. And, who the client is, what the name of the opportunity, what type of opportunity. In that case, maybe we're displaying what the value or the dollar amount of that sales opportunity is and an estimated close date, so that I can do very easy and quick pipeline reporting out of the Sales Center. So again, there's a lot of consistency between how the centers work, although the content or the data that's within each center is different depending on whether I'm in projects or sales or client center and so forth. So this is really kind of master record views of the projects that we have going on. But if you notice, each project also has a column here which is linked to Workspace. And so if I have a project, if I'm going to probably have other stuff that I need to store related to it, such as documents and deliverables, and maybe I've got task lists and things like that. Well, that's really the idea of a workspace, is where all that detailed information about a given project would be stored and collaborated on. And so the idea of Workspace is also through all the different centers. So if I was in Client Center and I clicked on a client, I could open up a workspace for that client, which is where its documents are. If I'm in Sales Center, if I clicked on an opportunity, I could go to each opportunity could have a workspace where all the documents would be found. So that idea of Workspace is throughout the entire environment. So let's take a quick look at what a workspace might look like. So if I click on Link to Workspace, by the way, we have a process that automates. All I have to do to create a workspace for a project is select a project, and there's a menu option that says Create Workspace. And our code goes out and it generates the unique SharePoint site for that particular project, and it also lays a template on that site so that it's ready to go in under a minute. You can have a project workspace that's been provisioned for the project team. So let's take a quick look at what a project workspace might look like. So here I am looking at a specific workspace. So the name of the project is ServicePoint365 implementation. I've got some of the metadata that's being displayed for that project, and you can control what fields are displayed in this details section, which is at the top. So you can turn on and off different fields. And then the next area is, here's where all my documents and deliverables for this project would be stored. And so the ability to store all those, of course you can have folders, subfolders, and then the ability to synchronize documents if you need to, carry them around on your local device. the ability to share documents both internally and externally. So all that functionality is still available. Any of these lists or libraries in the application can all be, also you can add things like alerts. So if I wanted to fire off an alert every time a document was added or changed or things like that, or if there's a workflow that we need to initiate that sends out an email, meaning maybe for an approval process, you can still extend all of this application with those common functionality found in SharePoint, using alerts and workflows and Power Apps and so forth. So this is my my documents. If I scroll down the page, I also have a project calendar, which you can provide for everybody on the project team for major milestones. You can synchronize this calendar back to Outlook. So if you want to actually view it also in Outlook and also be able to edit. So you can add new events in Outlook and have them reflect here or vice versa. If I scroll down the page a little bit further, I've got some other sections such as who are the key contacts for this project. If we have an ongoing issues log or list, shows me that information. I can synchronize contacts back to my Outlook as well. And then finally, I've got an area for here are project tasks where you can create tasks, make assignments, and of course you can synchronize that back to Outlook as well. And then some other sections such as here's some important links for this particular project. So the idea of a workspace is a single page, single pane of glass for a given project that has not just documents, but also has contacts, has calendars, has tasks, and so forth. So so that's all part of the workspace. And you can also connect this into Teams. So if you happen, I'll show you an example of that. If the client is starting to use Teams in some selective areas, you can expose the documents and all that within a Teams UI as well, which we'll show you in just a second. So that's a little bit about the concept of a workspace. And if you recall, that particular workspace had a number of sections on it, had a document library and had a task list and a calendar. Well, we've made it very easy that you can also change up what that template looks like. And we have, again, provided a settings screen. In this case, you can see that the top box here where I'm looking at the different settings related to projects, right in this area here, is you see that there's documents, calendars, contacts. All of those have been turned on, and that's the reason that they showed up on the project workspace. And if you want to simplify and say maybe all you need is a document library, you don't really need the others, you can just go in and you can flip off, so to speak, the other web parts. So it's just that easy. You don't need to know anything about SharePoint to be able to go in and make that level of tailoring. So, so that's a little bit more about the application. Again, time won't allow us to go into other centers at this point, but we'll be happy to do that in a different format and explore deeper any of the other centers that might be of interest to you or your clients. So let's kind of keep moving on here, and we'll go and take a look at some other information. I mentioned the ability to connect it to Teams. So this gives you an example to where on the left, I've got a team that's been created, and I'm showing documents within that team. But those documents are actually residing in ServicePoint365 and SharePoint Online, and I'm just exposing them in Teams. So what this does is it gives you an alternative way to use documents and share documents. You can use Teams when that makes sense. But we have feedback from a lot of clients that they like the team environment for some things, but they don't want to always have to navigate through Teams to be able to get to all their documents. And so through this method, you've got the best of both worlds. So I can use the Teams UI and be able to access the documents that way, if that makes sense. Or I can just use the SharePoint or ServicePoint environment to get the documents that way as well. It's the same documents, just exposed through two UIs. So what's the value statements for not only you as a reseller, but also for your customers? The first one is really speed to benefit and cost to benefit. So the ability to get up and running quickly without tying up a bunch of resources and dollars. And also the ability to increase adoption, so the stickiness of the overall platform increases, as well as with you as a reseller for your customers. If you're doing more than just turning on email, which has become a commodity, it gives you more business relationship with your customers. And then finally be able to do this without SharePoint skills or deep SharePoint skills. And so those are the key value statements. When you look at who's using it and where we have our references so far, really it's industries that are managing content related to clients or projects or proposals, resources, or partners, and that can really come across in a variety of industries. And here's some of the ones that you can see that we have some very strong references.
What we're going to do now is talk about if you've been able to get your customers onto Office 365 through this furnished house, through this fully furnished house. What are we going to do to actually make sure this is a successful implementation in 3 months or in 6 months? And so what are some of the pitfalls and hard times that we've found our customers encountering? And that's really where AvePoint comes in to partner with ServicePoint365 to make sure that just because you have a nice house today doesn't mean it's always going to stay that way. And so what can we do to help you bring content in that you might already be working on in other platforms and services, and what can we do to help you protect your information? So when we look at what it's like to bring content into a brand new furnished house, it's great for projects that are starting from scratch, but what we know is most of our customers are coming with a lot of pre-built information that we want to be able to share. And so what we're going to do is work with them on their existing content to help migrate it in using a number of methods. So as MSPs, you guys have different methods in terms of how this migration works, but it's not always easy to bring existing content with you. Part of the challenge is that when you're moving to Office 365, you're going to find that Microsoft has a wonderful throttling limit regarding how much content can be actually introduced at any given time. You're also going to find that it's not always as simple as lift and shift, especially when you start talking about project sites and you start talking about lightweight sales motions and marketing sites and intranet portals. A lot of those can live on various content sources. And so if you've got a company that's sitting on file shares or sitting on legacy SharePoint server or Documentum or eRoom or Lotus Notes or OpenText, there's going to be a lot of friction in terms of how we move their content because it's not going to be a simple lift and shift. This is also the typical time where the questions start being raised where when we actually look at how much content we have to move, we start asking, well, how much of this content is relevant? How much of it have we customized on our way in? How much of this is actually tagged in any way where we can understand it? And so there's a couple different ways where you could be getting your content into Office 365. One of the first ways is letting a lot of users drive it for themselves. So if you're using ServicePoint to create and provision new workplaces for users, you can simply say if you have existing content, you can drag and drop it right into Office 365. Now, typically, what you're going to see with that is it works really well when you're talking about moving from very, very simple file shares or places where people have been collaborating in the past. So that's one option that you've got. But what we typically see is that any migration is also going to involve some complexity. So there were some designs or workflows we wanted to move, or there were some customizations. And so what we do with that is we actually suggest a migration product. AvePoint has migration product to help you with that. And to give you guys an idea of what that looks like, when we're looking to answer the questions around how much content we have to move, one of the first steps that AvePoint does is we help customers with a pre-migration report to help understand how much content is going to be moved into Office 365 as part of that migration. It gives you a really good idea of how much you might need to prepare your house. Keeping with the house analogy, are we going to need a 4-bedroom house, a 5-bedroom, or a 100-bedroom house? That's largely going to depend on how much content we're looking to move in. So what we'll do is we'll give a quick summary or a quick scan of how much content and how many users you should be looking to contact as part of the migration. What we also do is we look at how much of that content is going to be customized. So you understand whether this is going to be a really short-term lift and shift or something you might want to be able to bill service hours against to help make that migration possible. After that, everything else works very similar to a drag and drop migration in the sense that we're able to simply move content from whatever source system, in this case it would be a source SharePoint environment, over to an Office 365 environment. And it's very simple in terms of how the lift and shifts typically work. It's very similar to what your customers would be doing on their own without a migration tool, but the key difference here is that that migration is going to preserve all metadata and workflows as part of that lift and shift. So as if to prove that that's actually what's happening as part of that migration, we also take our time to make sure that there's a migration status board so you get a good path to communicate to customers how much content is actually being moved on schedule, as well as what sources and where they're being migrated to, so that you have a report that you can present back to the user that gives it a good concept of how quickly the migration is going, but also can act as a closure report where you can present back to their business to say, yes, time is actually on our side and we're able to close out our source systems and potentially save the company money on this migration to Office 365. So from our perspective, migration can be complicated for all the reasons we talked about at the beginning, but it honestly doesn't have to be that complicated. As long as you're using a migration tool to help you with that move to Office 365, including to custom portals like ServicePoint 365, a lot of that can be handled by the technology on the back end without you having to worry too much about it. Now the good news is, in case things do go wrong, that's where AvePoint has built a strong product tool set that helps in terms of managing a lot of the policies and the mappings between source and destination systems. So if you end up with a customer who's doing a more complex migration and also happens to be moving Active Directory or other types of complexities, those are all handled as part of the migration as long as you tell our tool about it up front. So there's a lot we could do to help smooth over the move-in process in order to get to your house. So given that, once we get the house populated, and again, we do suggest it in this order where you first start by building a good house and attracting end users and then figuring out how to get their content in. We do recommend ongoing maintenance to help preserve and manage their environment. So the reason why we say that is that there are a lot of challenges that typically come up usually right after the migration is complete or right after users start using Office 365. So we'll break it into two key challenge areas. The first one is around management of Office 365, and then preceding that, we're going to talk about what it looks like from a protection, a content level protection in Office 365. So we've heard from many different companies that are making that move that once you start moving to Office 365, especially from on-prem, there was a fair amount of comfort level that customers had with being able to control and own and hold their data and where it was being stored. If data was lost, there was an enterprise backup solution or something available for them to be able to recover data. And yes, it was on their shoulders to preserve and make sure that the data was always available. But honestly, you know, that's something that it was okay because they were accountable then. They had the control over information and control over their data. So a lot of companies think that when you're moving to Office 365, you're now surrendering that control over to Microsoft. And the reality is actually you're not surrendering the control to Microsoft. What you're doing is just simply forgetting about your obligations. So Microsoft has an obligation to the customer to maintain availability of their service. But what we typically see is that they overlook the necessity of having protection of their individual content and their data. And so when we think about it from just a simple MSP perspective, when you're actually trying to work day to day inside the environment, there's a lot of simple accidents that happen where users accidentally overshare content and need to replace it, or they inherit permissions when originally they were unique and now they can't roll it back. They made changes to documents and then cannot find it in the recycle bin, or they deleted sites, or they made other types of just general end user mistakes where when you go to Microsoft and ask them to do a restore, let's say from an employee who left the company, or that you ask them to do a restore of just a library within a SharePoint site, what you end up with is Microsoft coming back to you saying, yes, we could do that. It's going to take us a few weeks, and we didn't preserve data for more than 90 days. And on top of that, in order for us to roll back that library, we're going to have to roll back that entire SharePoint site and lose all your users' information. Because again, they're there for the availability of data, not for that end user protection there. So that's where you enter third-party products like ourselves, where from a backup and recovery perspective, we have you covered regardless of what Office 365 services you're using. So we highlighted today on the call today what it looks like when you're using things like SharePoint Online in Office 365, Teams and OneDrive being a natural extension of that. But then we also know that your customers are going to be working with things like Project Online, public folders in Exchange, as well as things like Dynamics 365 or other types of Office 365 services as well. And so what we do is we create under one umbrella the ability to create a backup plan to protect information across the Office 365 stack. So regardless of whether you're using ServicePoint or you're using additional customizations that you've made to things like Project Online or Dynamics 365, all of those are protected through a single platform. What we do is we create restore points up to 4 times per day, and that is actually on us to monitor and manage. From a management perspective, you are now offering this service back to your customers without having to worry about the tools required to maintain it or the time required to make sure that 4 backups are actually running every day. That's actually something that AvePoint's responsibility is to monitor and to manage through our SaaS platform. So when it comes time for the users to submit their service requests, for instance, they lost something, this is a real point of confidence in the Office 365 setup that you've established with the customer. If you can't help them in one of the more common service requests or help desk tickets that might be opened as an MSP, there's going to be a lot of shaky confidence in terms of whether or not they can trust this new platform where all the information is being stored. And so what we do is we make it as simple as if you are on the phone with an Office 365 user, we can help walk you through a restore very simply to say, okay, what kind of content did you lose and in what service? So were you working in ServicePoint? Were you working in Teams or in public folders? Where was the information that you lost? And then giving you a really simple navigation that allows you to browse through the tree in Office 365, through the hierarchy in Office 365, to find the exact files or the exact versions you're looking to restore. Even if Office 365 were to go down, your customers still maintain access to this data with the ability to export this content outside of our service and restore it directly to your own storage devices or to a customer's on-prem locations. On top of it, we know that your users aren't always going to know where and how they lost their information, and so we provide the ability to search by default all of the metadata and all of the content that you might be missing in your production environment, so that when you go to do a restore, we're able to pull back the information regardless of whether you knew exactly where it was stored or not. Now, the restore options are actually interesting because that's not just going to be restoring data back to where it came from, but in the event, which is actually super common, where you've had a OneDrive or an Exchange mailbox removed, and we don't necessarily need to revive the user to get the data back. Or in another example, we had a project Workspace that ServicePoint created where we don't necessarily need the project reopened. We just need some files that were stored in that project, or just need some files in that OneDrive, or just a few emails in that Exchange. We have the ability then to also restore out of place to any storage location. So what that means is you could pull that content back to any Azure or AWS storage location. You could pull that content back to another person's mailbox or OneDrive, or even to a brand new project inside of the SharePoint Online interface. So it gives you a ton of flexibility in terms of how and where those restores happen. So the key here is that our goal is to make it as simple as possible to protect the information, but we know that that's just one type of service request that you guys are experiencing as MSPs once you deploy Office 365. For instance, we typically hear where customers are coming to us saying that we need to run IT audits on how our information is protected and where it's stored. So could you just give us a quick report that shows me who has access to all the different projects that we've created inside of SharePoint Online? Other examples being it's really easy to share, and we accidentally overshared information because, when we hit that share button inside of Office 365, it suggested we share with everyone. And so how do we prevent those types of accidents from happening? How do we create better governance around how that information is shared? Or even something as simple as, we are constantly moving or restructuring information. And this is also common for MSPs where if the company you're supporting goes through acquisition, how do we move content from one Office 365 tenant to another? These are all common things that are extremely frustrating and difficult if you've ever had to do those types of service requests yourself in Office 365. And so what we provide for MSPs as part of this offering is access to our cloud management suite. So similar to our cloud backup, this is a SaaS platform that is run on the AvePoint cloud. Also homegrown, built by administrators much like yourselves, according to the common tickets that need to be pursued. So by way of example, if you were looking at satisfying that first tab that we talked about where you just needed to implement better governance controls or governance policies, we have something here called our Policy Enforcer, which allows us to go and set governance policies on settings, version controls, activity histories, permissions, or any number of things that your customers may be looking to control in Office 365, and to scan for that regularly. So as an example, whenever you say that we have a policy where we don't want external users to have access to our internal portals, how do we run those scans on a regular basis and report back what issues we found? And so you can see here that we've already detected a violation and are reporting it through one central unified dashboard. Now the cool news about this as well is we know that from a service account perspective, MSPs typically take a lot of their time to handle requests like this, and how do we fix them? And so we're always trying to make your lives easier. So we've provided automatic resolution for a lot of these policy violations through a simple fix button or even through automatic repairs that our products can run on your behalf. If we were talking about the scenario where we just wanted to talk through a simple move between one tenant to another, that's also accomplished through the same as our migration interface where you have your source tenants, source Office 365 sites on your left, and also your destination sites on your right here. And so this is perfect where if you've already gotten started with Office 365 and have yet to really start embracing something like ServicePoint 365, this is also a fantastic way for you to provision new workspaces with ServicePoint 365, but pre-populate it with data that's already in the cloud. And so from our perspective, our goal here is to give as much flexibility and as much control as possible to help protect information, to help automate a lot of the tasks, the management tasks that you may have to do, and also to help in terms of the content management and restructuring on an ongoing basis. So just because you built a great house doesn't mean that your job is done and doesn't mean that you won't have more to do in the coming months. That's really where AvePoint's management solutions come into play when paired with ServicePoint 365.
Hey, I just wanted to throw in a real live case example of the backup restore capability. So we had a joint client that was in the construction industry. One of their project managers got infected with ransomware, and they were syncing things down to their local device just naturally from SharePoint Online. And so, of course, everybody's very familiar with what ransomware is all about. It's been obviously widely publicized, but it infected that project manager's all the documents related to the projects. It infected them locally, and since they were syncing, it also infected the ones that were in the cloud. And so they had 6 different projects that he was working on that they could not access any of the documentation. And so they were faced with, of course, the pay the ransom or not. And luckily, the client was using ServicePoint and the AvePoint cloud backup solution. And what we were able to do is to actually just restore the documents for that one project manager, his 6 projects, to the previous backup before the ransomware was released. And they did not have to pay any of that ransom, and were back up and running very, very quickly. So that's examples of how this stuff plays out in the real world, and it really saved that company a lot of effort and time and money to get their documents back. So let's talk a little bit about licensing and how strategies about going about how do you include this for your customers. And there's really 3 different models that we see resellers doing. The first model is right up front when they're licensing the subscriptions to Office 365, is they go ahead and include in that bundle ServicePoint 365 as well as the AvePoint Cloud Backup and Management solution right up front. And the idea is that the conversation with the customer says, hey, Office 365 has a lot of different capability. We know you're going to want to use SharePoint Online because there's so much value for your business, but it would be a struggle, just using it as is out of the box. So we're going to go ahead and include some tools that's going to help you, light that up, as well as the overall protection of everything. And so, including it right up front as being your unique bundle for your customers. And it also, from a reseller standpoint, grows the revenue and the margin opportunity right up front. The other model is going back to existing Office 365 customers that are already up and running. Maybe they've only initiated the email workload, and having conversation with them about, hey, what are you doing with SharePoint? How are you using it? And many times they'll probably shake their head and say, we're not. And so be able to open up new discussions about, well, we have a solution that can really help you get that get value out of that product you're paying for already, and be able to then talk about ServicePoint and of course the AvePoint products to be able to back it up and manage it. And then since this is an MSP audience, many of you are already doing services around, managed services around the Office 365 platform for your customers, and the ability to add in more capability to your managed services group to where they could also be providing services around the ServicePoint and SharePoint environment, which could be setting up users, granting permissions, also around the backup and management, which would be making sure the jobs are running, helping with restores if they come up. And so the ability to grow the managed services practice, which is a natural extension about what onto what you're probably already doing with just your Office 365 managed services. So just wanted to talk about those 3 different models of how we're seeing resellers be successful. And I know people are probably wondering about how is this stuff licensed? Well, very, very comfortable licensing, very similar to how you're licensing Office 365, meaning that it's a per seat, per month subscription, and it's available directly through Tech Data's Stream 1, as well as other disties if you happen to not be affiliated with Tech Data. And you can go in and just opt in for seats of ServicePoint, seats of AvePoint, right through the Stream 1 portal. And the same flexibility that you have with the Office 365 subscriptions, where you can go in and you can add increase seats, you can decrease seats, you can cancel. So you have that same flexibility with the ServicePoint and the AvePoint products. So really a very comfortable way of beginning to include it in your businesses. So let's go ahead and maybe flip to the last slide, if you don't mind, John, and wrap things up. We hope that you've seen some and heard some things that can help you grow your businesses today. We invite you, whether reach out to me, David, or John directly. Here's our contact information if we can answer more questions for you. You can contact your distributor as well, and they have teams that are versed on the products to help you as well on the whole licensing side. If you need assistance with conversations with your customer to help explain the value, if you need assistance in doing demonstrations, we're also available to help you in those regards to be successful. And even in the implementation side, so on the ServicePoint side, our company is also prepared if your team would like to actually have some hand-holding in the first couple deployments of customers. We can also help you with those extended services. So invite you to please reach out to us and contact us anytime if we can help you propel any of your deals forward. So I think that's the end of our paid performance here, John. Any other parting comments that you have for the group?
Nope. I actually wanted to affirm your ransomware comment. I think it's been something that's been in the news, and if you're looking to enhance your offering of Office 365 to talk about your defense against ransomware, that's certainly something that's going to help increase your the visibility of your offering as well. So thank you, David, for mentioning that. I think it was a good point.
Thank you again for taking an hour out of your day, and please let us know how we can help you grow your businesses. So I think that's it for now. Thank you.